This is going to be a very frustrating review for me, because the reports of me liking this film have not been exaggerated. I really liked this movie a lot, but I cannot adequately explain why without reviewing the movie as a whole. A brief first impressions video like this is not going to cut it. Plus, I don't want to give away all the points I want to make before doing the full, official, dear God, it's going to have to be 12 parts or something review, so all I can offer at this junction is an overview of the things that I liked, as well as responding to some of the criticisms the film has received. There have been many comparisons between The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man 3, and needless to say, these comparisons have not been favorable, as Spider-Man 3 was one of the worst superhero films ever made. I definitely see where those comparisons are coming from, but honestly, I felt like this film completely avoided a lot of the mistakes Spider-Man 3 made when trying to tell a gigantic story with lots of characters and storylines. There is one major way in which this is like Spider-Man 3, and that's that it has a lot of balls in the air. If you liked the movie, consider them juggling balls, and if you didn't like it, consider them scrotums. Just for fun, I made a list of every plotline this film contains, and the final total was a whopping 8. Including the truth about Peter's parents, Electrode's motivations and origins, Harry Osborn's story, Peter and Harry's friendship, Peter and Gwen's relationship, Peter struggling with Gwen's father's wishes, Oscorp's dirty secrets, Aunt May struggling without Ben. And there's probably more, but I only saw this once, so that was all that I could recall mentally. But for all that this film has a somewhat overstuffed plot, there is one consistent theme that runs through it all that I think holds it together to a certain degree. And that is abandonment. Specifically, the feeling of having been discarded and the feeling of having been let down by someone important in your life. Electrode being let down by Spider-Man, Gwen being let down by Peter, Peter being let down by his parents, and Harry being let down by fucking everyone. It is the primary motivation and reason behind every decision that every character makes in the film. And that kind of constant is something Spider-Man 3 did not have. Now, as far as the Spider-Man aspect of the film is concerned, Amazing Spider-Man 2 is pure gold. The characterization of Spider-Man is the best that there has ever been. I noted that the climaxes of both Iron Man 3 and Thor 2 gave me a gigantic glee moment. Well, let me tell you, every time Spider-Man goes into action in this film, it's a glee moment. Just the way he moves and the dynamic decisions he makes in combat when things aren't going his way puts me into the action and engages me, rather than being a video game that I wish I could play. But in addition to nailing the action, they also give us the best portrayal of Spider-Man as a personal hero that I have ever seen in one of these films. For every moment that he's beating up a bad guy, there is also a moment of Spider-Man speaking encouraging words to the people and giving his city hope. And you really get the sense that he's not saying these things because he has to. He's saying them because he believes it himself. But probably the best aspect of the film is Peter and Gwen Stacy. These two go back and forth about whether or not they should be together, Gwen wanting to embrace their relationship despite the challenges, and Peter not wanting to put her in harm's way to respect the wishes of her father, who warned him to stay away for her own good. These two have that all-natural teenager speak that they had from the first movie, and I still like it a lot. They sound like unrehearsed kids having a real conversation in every scene that they're in. But what I like about this conflict is that it does away with that I can't be with you, but I also can't tell you why shtick from some of the other films. I think that had its place in those films, but there's no beating around the bush this time. Gwen knows why Peter is having doubts about their relationship, and they can talk about this conflict freely without the writers having to dangle the I have a secret carrot in front of our faces. But now let's talk about the villains, and here's one Spider-Man 3 criticism the film has received that I completely, utterly, balls to the meat grinder disagree with. That this movie had too many villains. Here's a quick question for you. How many villains did Spider-Man 3 have? That's right, 4. Sandman, Venom, New Goblin, and Sam Raimi. Now, how many villains did The Amazing Spider-Man 2 have? 1. Electro. The Rhino was a teaser at the end, and Harry Osborn spends most of the film being the victim before he becomes the villain. And even that moment was just a setup for the next film. And that development had everything to do with this story. It was not simply a setup for the next film. Another Spider-Man 3-like comparison that I've heard is that Electro is just another Sandman, in that he's just the environmental menace of the film and has no real development. I agree to a point, but let me explain why this works in contrast to why the Sandman didn't work. Electro is a very simple character with a very simple motivation. He's psychotically obsessed with Spider-Man, one little thing Spider-Man says to him makes him think they're best friends now, and the slightest divergence from that delusion turns him into a villain. Yes, it's simple, simple stuff, but they kept it simple. What they didn't do is this. Oh, he's not such a bad guy. Look, he's got a sick daughter, and she's sick, and he has to do bad stuff because sick, but he's not really that bad, you guys. This movie makes no attempt to manipulate you into thinking this character is any deeper than he is. They establish right from the get-go that this guy is just a nut. Now, does that mean that this is a deep, intricate, and compelling villain? No, but for fuck's sake, at least they weren't pretending he was a deep, intricate, and compelling villain like they did with the Sandman, or since this is a Kurtzman-Orky screenplay, fucking CumberCon. At least they were honest this time instead of going, hey look, it's Khan, he's an epic villain, you guys. Oh really? Then why is his only action in the film just a tantrum, and why doesn't he have any plans, goals, or actions that make any logical sense? Excuse me? Did you not hear us when we said Khan? If all they honestly had is a menace to populate the film, I would much rather they be honest about that. And after all the failed attempts to construct the epic villain, it was almost nice to have a villain that just terrorized the city for a change. Besides, we have a ton of personal conflicts in this film, and adding one more might have been a bit much. Then we have Harry Osborn, a character that took me completely by surprise. And here is once again another complaint about the film that I totally disagree with. The charge that they rushed into him being a villain. No, they didn't! Are you kidding me? This kid tried everything before resorting to villainy, and hell, he actually would have had a good reason to be the villain right from the start. But he wasn't. This poor kid was completely abandoned and treated like shit by his father, and suddenly he has a multi-billion-dollar company dropped into his lap. Now, a villain who truly was rushed would have immediately resorted to using the company for nefarious ends, but Harry is just a kid, and he has no idea what to do with this thing. So often he struggles between what everyone expects him to be and just being a lost kid who doesn't know what to do. The first scene between he and Peter totally captures that point. This is a tragic character well before he becomes a villain of any kind, and everything he goes through in the film very naturally leads to him becoming what he is in the end. Just to give you an idea of what a person Harry is in this film, we at one point have a situation where Harry believes that he needs Spider-Man's blood to live. Peter asks something to the effect of, how are you going to get Spider-Man's blood? To which Harry replies, I'll ask him. And then you know what he does? He sits down with Spider-Man and fucking asks him. He didn't have any ulterior motives for the blood. He didn't have a trap set up in case Spider-Man said no. He just sat down and had a conversation with him like a person. That really impressed me, because it would have been all too easy for the writers to make him the villain now, but they kept on treating him like a person. In fact, through the whole film, I was surprised by how often a lot of these characters resort to reasoning with one another before devolving into action. Another negative comparison to Spider-Man 3 has been the two villains teaming up in the end, but the difference is that these villains had no reason to team up. In Spider-Man 3, there was that classic bad line, you want Spider-Man dead, and so do I, where someone needed to smack the screenwriters awake and remind them that at no time in the film did Sandman want Spider-Man dead. Not only is there a reason for both of these characters to take revenge on Spider-Man, but their teaming up ties in once again to the abandonment theme. So I see this as being nothing like Spider-Man 3, or if it is, then this is how that aspect of Spider-Man 3 should have been. But now we come to the major spoiler warning of the review. If you have not seen the film and want to be surprised, go no further. Are they gone? Okay, Gwen Stacy dies in the end. And not only is this not a token death, but it really resonated with me and actually made me feel really bad. As you may have noticed, I have been growing quite weary of the whole, oh, never mind, they aren't really dead, we were just kidding strategy that writers have gotten into lately. Even when it comes to movies that I liked. And after asking us to be all emotionally invested in Captain Kirk having a little sleep for a few minutes, I said, you know what? The next time you guys try to create dramatic tension over a death, will you please have the decency to actually kill your characters? Well, they did, and I was very impressed. I have been racking my brain trying to think of another superhero film that had the flat-out balls to kill the female lead. The Dark Knight was the only film that came to mind, and that is good company indeed. It's not even that Gwen died, and it's not even that Peter didn't save her. It's that he just barely didn't save her. Of all the effective ways to show how cruel and tragic this is, it was one of the best moments in the film, without which the whole seeing the ghost of Dennis Leary all the time would mean nothing. Because Dennis Leary was right, and Peter was wrong. That was a very gutsy and ambitious message to put into this thing, and I'm very proud of these two for finally doing something other than just playing it safe. Everything that needs to pay off in this film does so, and the stuff that needed to carry over to the next film is perfectly acceptable to wait for. This film has been deemed anything but a slam dunk in the eyes of the general public. It's squarely in the mixed reception category, but I get the sense that it's leaning more towards badly received than good. I know because it was almost naturally assumed that I wasn't going to like this one. To the people that didn't like this movie, I get it. I really do. For all that it has a consistent theme running through it, the narrative itself is unfocused. There aren't any plot holes here, more like plot traffic jams, or three plots at once trying to get through the same door like a Three Stooges routine. Each individual element of the story shines when it has its time in the spotlight, but the film as a whole doesn't coalesce the way you feel it should. I also don't understand why so much a deal was made about the Peter's parents' mystery plot, only to reveal something that I think we all just assumed in the first place. And the ending credits coming up was somewhat of a joke because the film didn't seem to realize that it ended about 10 minutes ago. But for all of its admitted flabbiness, there is a good screenplay here. I don't think this worked out exactly the way they hoped it would, but I see that being due to an overabundance of good ideas, rather than random stupid ideas thrown at the wall with none of them sticking. Maybe I'm alone on this one, but I suppose it wouldn't even be the 50th time I had an opinion that differed from the majority, so there it is. I thought the movie was really good. I can't wait to see it again. I really can't wait for it to come out on Blu-ray so that I can illustrate this a lot better than I have in this review, but take this for what it is. The film is not flawless, but there is so much in here that works. And even though there are just too many threads to be tightened as much as they needed to be tightened, for me, the film still comes out on top. Definitely the best Spider-Man film in this new franchise, and although it doesn't hold a candle to Spider-Man 2, it is still one of the best Spider-Man films that I have seen.